One of the most influential figures in American history was George Washington. He was an American political leader, military general, statesman, and founding father who served as the first president of the United States. He was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army that secured victory over British in the American Revolution. He presided the Constitutional Convention of 1807 that established the U.S. Constitution and on federal government. Washington has been called the father of his country for his leadership in the formative days of the new nation. Washington was born on 22 February 1732 in Westmoreland Country in the British colony of Virginia to Austin Washington and Maryball Washington. Washington could trace his family's presence in North America to his great-grandfather John Washington, who migrated from England to Virginia. The family was granted land by Henry VIII but lost most of his wealth under Puritan government of Oliver Cromwell that led to migration of Washington's grandfather in 1657. His father died when George was 11 years old. Little is known about Washington's childhood that resulted in manufacturing of many fables by biographers to fill in the gap. Similarly, there are few details known about his early education. It is believed that he finished his formal schooling at around age of 15. At the age of 16, George became a surveyor, and a year later he was appointed surveyor of Culpeper County, Virginia. It was his first public office. Lawrence Washington's service as Adjutant General of Virginia militia inspired George to seek a commission. In December 1752, George was made a commander of the Virginia military and became involved in the start of the French and Indian War, that is also known as the 7 Years' War. During the war, he won a reputation for bravery. After the French and Indian War, George settled down and married the widow Martha Dandridge Custis. He inherited the estate of Mount Vernon after the death of his brother Lawrence Washington and brought up Martha's 2 children from her former marriage. The couple never had the kids of their own. In the same year, he was elected to the Virginian legislature. Soon George and his fellow landowners became upset with unfair treatment by their British rulers. They started to argue and demand their rights. When the British refused, they went to war. George was one of the Virginia's delegates of the First and Second Continental Congress. That was a group of representatives from each colony who decided to fight the British together. In 725, he was appointed as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. It was not an easy task to wage war on the world's most powerful nation. Moreover, Washington's training and experience were primarily in frontier warfare involving small number of soldiers. He was not trained in the open field style of battle practiced by the commanding British generals. Furthermore, maintaining the flow of supplies for thousands of men in the field was not an easy task either. Washington proved to be a better general than military strategist. His strength lay not in his genius on the battlefield, but in his ability to keep the struggling colonial army together even after a series of setbacks. Eventually, an American victory at Saratoga in 1777 propelled the French to agree to an alliance with the Americans. Although Washington's fortunes did not immediately improve, however, with the French military and naval assistance, the tide began to turn. Consequently, the British Army surrendered in Yorktown on October 17, 1781. Peace talks began in Paris and a treaty was signed in 1783. In 1787, Washington was elected President of the Constitutional Convention and used his immense influence to persuade the states to rectify the resulting constitutions. In 1781, he was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States. He faced huge challenges in welding together the individual states in order to establish a new nation. Washington wanted to retire after his first term, but he was re-elected to a second term in 1792. During the war between Britain and France in 1793, he remained neutral and normalized diplomatic ties with Britain. He stepped down from presidency after 2 terms as he believed that the office of president should not become too powerful like a king or a dictator. Washington returned to Mount Vernon to become a farmer again. Just a few years after leaving the office of president, Washington caught a cold after inspecting these properties in rain. The cold developed into a throat infection and he died on 14 December 1799 at the age of 67. He was buried at Mount Vernon. Washington left one of the most long-lasting legacies in American history. His face appears on the US dollar bill, and hundreds of US schools and towns as well as nation's capital city are named after him.